some of this stuff is probably a little more, I don't know, exciting to me because I've been dealing with this for so long. So if some of it's nerdy, please forgive me. But just to give you a little background, this is what we were trying to accomplish. These were the goals that were set out by that stakeholder group. Improve tidal connection, improve circulation during both an open and enclosed condition, remove the massive amount of historic fill that's at the site, eliminate habitat fragmentation and disturbances. So we had these bridges that basically bisected the lagoon, enhance the visitor experience in outdoor classroom. The Malibu Lagoon is heavily used by a bunch of resource agencies and naturalist groups and educational groups to do wetland education, and obviously they were one of our main user groups, as were the surfing groups and the birding groups, and then ultimately increase the habitat diversity at Malibu Lagoon. So basically, this is just re-saying it again. It had poor circulation, it had low species richness, so it had poor bug communities, poor benthic invertebrates, poor shellfish, lots of nutrients, eutrophication causing dead zones, a lot of invasive and non-native vegetation, and again, I already mentioned the habitat fragmentation and disturbance. So this is basically the gist of it. Those are the bridges I talked about that are coming across. Water is coming in from the ocean. It basically has to make a hard 90-degree left to get into these channels, and these are the channels that we dug in 1983. And then between these channels, or the openings, are these 3 bridges. And the bridges are what I was talking about, bisecting the entire site, basically cutting the site in half. And on either side of the bridges, to make them so we didn't have to span as much distance, are these fill islands, which remain lots of fill. And again, this was a dump site from the 20s on. In the 70s, it was baseball fields, Little League fields. And then when they dug the original configuration out in 1983, they actually removed almost 70,000 yards of dirt, but still left a substantial amount of fill behind. And it's these narrow pinch points that are causing muted tidal action and minimal circulation. So what we're getting is an accumulation of sediments that falls on the bottom there. We're getting this organic muck, which you'll see some pictures of as we're going through, that basically is devoid of oxygen, basically robs oxygen from the water. And so therefore we have the poor fish communities, the poor bug communities, poor shellfish, and poor crabs and crustacean communities. And so those are the things we're trying to improve. And since we did the restoration in '83, we've been studying it, right? Part of our permits were study it, see how it's doing. And we had a little peak going up to about 1985, 86, and then it started to decline and decline and decline and decline. And so basically, we've been commissioning all these studies and doing all this work ever since to figure out what's wrong and how we could fix those issues and make this truly a thriving ecosystem and a healthy environment. Because it's a beautiful place and it deserves to be a healthy lagoon. So the existing channel is on the top. You can see it's much narrower and steeper sides. The new channels will be these elongated bottom sides. So it'll be shallow, U-shaped, and it'll allow the water to slowly flood over the landscape and give us different moisture levels and different salinity levels, which will give us more diversity of plants, more diversity, more bugs, more diversity of all organisms at the site. And essentially, this is the engineering design of what it's going to look like. It's going to be basically one main dendritic channel or meandering channel with 3 tributaries coming off of it, right? So you got a tributary coming up here, tributary coming up here, and a tributary coming up here. Then there's going to be 4 islands, which will be used for birds, especially when in the summertime when the lagoon is closed, the sandbar in front of the lagoon closes. And these will be protection areas against predation. And then we have all these interpretive features that we're putting in. Instead of running through the middle of the lagoon, they're now going to run through the outside of the lagoon. So we have a bunch of overlooks where people can view the wildlife and the birds. We have a watershed fountain. We have this winter clock, which will actually tune the visitor into tide and tune the visitor into when the lagoon is closed, when there's really high circulation. We have another picnic area. We have a swale that's taking water, that's going to improve the water quality that's coming into our site from the colony. And then we have a watershed overlook area where you're going to actually be able to look upstream back at the watershed. And June 6th, it all begins. So technically, the project was set to begin on June 1st. June 1st was a Friday or something, right? A Friday or a holiday weekend or a Thursday, or we didn't want to start. So June 4th was a Monday, was going to be the technical start date. And we had some stuff going on, but not that much going on. June 6th, they started bringing the fences into the site. And June 6th, I get a call that says, Mark, there's nobody at the lagoon. I was at the Abramson house or something. You have to go down there and talk to the press. And I was like, okay. And this is what happened when I showed up.
Mark, where's the new dewatering permit?
Oh, I wanted like to talk to you some information.
Where's the new dewatering plan?
What's the new water plan? Do you have one for us as the public, concerned public?
Yes, it was like being in an IMAX movie with iPhones, with me as the centerpiece. So also on June 6th, we started fencing the site, and basically we cut off half of our parking lot and fenced all the area that was going to be in construction, and that's a safety issue, which we always do when we're doing construction at a site. And this is one of my favorite days. That's Miss Suzanne in the classy hat right here and red vest. And this is us giving the site over to the contractor. So this is really day one for them of having the construction site. So that was a pretty exciting day, especially after we've been talking about the project for 20 years or so. June 4th through the 8th. So we started on June 4th, at least the biology department, this started on June 4th. And we spent 4 days before they even put a fence up, capturing those reptiles and lizards and stuff that we could see on site, and trying to capture them and relocate them to areas outside the construction area. And we did quite good, considering it was full of vegetation, and you know, we probably would have done better if we had some Cub Scouts, but we did fairly good. Then once the site became fenced on June 8th, we began our trapping activities. So we basically set out 700 traps for 4 or 5 nights in a row, so 3,500 to 4,000 trap nights, where we set out traps in strategic areas where we knew the contractor was going to be removing vegetation, and we wanted to capture and relocate as many animals that were using the site as possible, put them in the same habitat out of the construction zone. So we spent quite a bit of resources doing that. So we had different size traps for different size mammals. This is the famous South Coast marsh vole that we found on the site. And this one actually came out of a burrow when we were doing construction, and my biology people got around it and coaxed it into a bucket, and we moved it to a different location. Then on June 8th, heavy equipment starts to come in, and this we thought was going to be a big protest day, threats of people tying themselves to the bulldozers, spike strips, whatever, you know. So we were expecting big things. We had a huge incident command thing, right? I'm a restoration guy, a biology guy, and we had this big kind of police presence, right? And they had this incident staging to make sure that everything was okay and everything. And fortunately, we didn't really need them, but the state was ultimately prepared for any kind of action that might occur. So now we've trapped, and now we're starting to remove vegetation. And I have about 3 times as many biological monitors on site in front of each piece of equipment as there are construction workers and equipment on site. So they're literally guiding these equipment into place, and then I have people surrounding each piece of equipment, which, by the way, I've never seen on any other project. And we're literally training the contractor on how we want the vegetation removed, so we can capture as many of the mammals and small rodents as possible. So this is the construction guy probably yelling at me, and this is my biological monitor pretending not to notice. And so here, this is the best shot I had of it, but they just have such this light touch with this is an excavator, and they can just literally grab it like giving it a haircut and just pull it back like sod, right? And so they would pull it back and they would go down, you know, an inch and a half just to get that layer of sod and the loose roots. And then all the rodents and mice and the voles would pop out, and then my guys would get in there with nets, put them in buckets, and relocate them. And we had this team that was doing this for, I don't know, the 10 to 12 days that they were actually grubbing it. The contractors are going crazy because we're going, oh, just, you know, a little bit slower, a little bit, you know, can you do it a little bit, can you do it a little bit smaller? And then if we hit a bush, could you shake the bush a little bit? They've never seen anything like it, right? So, and then on June 11th, something happened. The lagoon breached. And here you can see how wide the breach point was. And there was all kinds of conspiracy theories about how the lagoon breached. But the lagoon breached, and now I have my fish people jumping into action. So I have my biological monitors doing the bulldozers, and then here comes the fishing people, right? So now we have to build the berm. It's a perfect opportunity for us to build the berm because we have a low tide. We can make contact with this low area here, right? That's the channel. You can see we've already set up sandbags and silt fencing. So once the tide went out, they're isolating this channel so no fish can come back in, right? And then they fish behind that area to get any fish out so we can relocate them into the main channel. This yellow thing is our turbidity curtain. So when we do have to work here and create mud here, or when we install the berm here, no turbidity goes from our construction side of the property into the main lagoon or into the surf zone. And the requirement is to build a berm that's at 10-foot elevation that goes all the way across the project to separate the main lagoon or the main river mouth estuary from the western channels where we're doing the construction on. And so here you can see these are my excavators, and they work like a beautiful ballet. One of them grabs the dirt from one side, the other one grabs the dirt from the other side, and they just fling this dirt and move it into place. And you can't, you know, it's like these incredible huge dinosaurs that can move dirt like it's like you're doing it with your hand. It's incredible. And so we're starting to construct the temporary dike by June 15th. You can see here's our excavators. Here's all my biology people. I've got people fishing in the back channels. I got the pre-construction guys pumping water from these channels into other channels so that we can completely secure the area and say there's no fish, absolutely no fish left in the channels. And they're still building the berm. And here you can see the berm's getting a little higher, right? That's probably 3 or 4 foot high now. The turbidity curtain's in front of it, again, protecting against silt getting into our main lagoon. And then this shows both the turbidity curtain and the silt curtains, and they're fishing underneath. This is one of our 3 or 4 fish teams on site. And they pull these nets across this channel as we're pumping, and they just capture the fish, count them, measure them, and move them into the main lagoon. And that happened for,
Seemed like weeks.
yeah, it was like 10 days or something. It was pretty crazy. And then here comes our vegetation salvage people. Same basic time frame, right? So before I can start grubbing all that vegetation and get rid of all that vegetation, we're trying to salvage as much vegetation as we can from this site. They're putting them in these little black flats and separating them, and they're harvesting, I don't know, 25 different types of vegetation, take them off to a nursery to grow them in Santa Barbara, where our contractor's from. They've also collected seeds from not only Malibu Lagoon a year and a half ago, but Magoo Lagoon in Ventura and Bayona wetlands, so that we have a good diversity of seeds from all the wetland habitat. By June 18th, we have a berm. We have a final berm, and now my site is isolated from the main river mouth estuary to our construction area, and we can really get cracking. On June 19th, these were the sycamores here,
They may have been London plane trees, though.
or London plane trees, which look very much like sycamores. But they were planted in the old picnic area, and with the new configuration of the lagoon, there's gonna be water basically that comes right through the middle of that. So these trees are not gonna survive, but we're reusing them on site for habitat. They're actually taking full trees, using them on site for in-stream and for bird habitat. And then several of the trees are being used by Clark for our amphitheater benches, which is one of the nice interpretive features that we're going to have there. So they're going to actually cut those into cool benches and leave them on site. So I thought that was pretty cool. These are the bridges, or what used to be the bridges. And actually, some people came and took wood and salvaged some of the wood from the bridges. We actually reused some of the bridge wood on site for temporary projects. But the bridges are now gone as of June 21st, or 3 of the 4 bridges are now gone as of June 21st. Then we find a bunch of interesting stuff here at the wetlands. That's a toilet seat. When they were digging the hole for this pump, like I said, they were pumping water from one of our old channels to other channels to make sure it's clear of fish. And then now they're pumping water to the other channels so they can actually start to do work in them. Then here's kind of, I mean, we knew it was a fill site. We knew it was a Caltrans fill site since the 20s. And then they started pulling stuff out of it. And we were, maybe this was, a lot of trash, but it kept coming. And some of the things we found in the soils have surprised us, and we're finding debris. I mean, even today we're finding debris in the soils. Remember I mentioned that organic muck? I don't know how well this shows up on it, but this is like the consistency of Jell-O, and it literally seeps like lava, right? It looks like a lava formation as it gurgles out. And this took, I don't know, 4 weeks to dry before they could haul some of it off-site. Some of it they blended back into our fill soils to get some nutrients. But it's incredible, and that's what we're pulling out of the bottom of the channels, and that's why there's nothing living in this thing. It is the most horrific, disgusting, black death that I can explain to you with, a stench to match. So here, I'm not sure how well they show up in here, but here you can see basically my site is clear, except for these green areas here, green areas here, green areas here. These are bird nests, and one of the things that we had to do was 30 days beforehand, 3 days beforehand, and then continuously throughout the project is do these avian nest surveys. If there are any nests on site, we have to protect them in place. And so we created these big buffer areas where the construction guys can't go, and then we actually have noise monitoring that we have to do. So if the noise is above 65 decibels, which is well below what I'm speaking at now, and my phone rings at louder than 65 decibels. So if I'm near the noise meter when my phone goes off, we're off the charts, right? So it was really interesting to get the construction guys, but the construction guys could use special equipment. They could turn their thing a certain way to avoid the exhaust pointing at our bird nest, and they were able to maneuver around pretty well, in spite of all my monitors protecting these, mallard and coot nests. And we probably had, 20 nests actually come to maturity while we're doing construction. So we have 20, I would guess maybe close to 100 maybe, little ducklings and cootlings and otherlings that have grown up at our little construction site. And then here's some more trash, just pipes, and we found these old tires about 6 foot under. They're pretty old tractor-looking tires. Found a cow skeleton. I don't have a picture of that, but my archaeologists and my Native American monitors got all excited for about 10 seconds when they saw bones, and then it was a cow skeleton. That was pretty disappointing for them. I was really excited. And July 3rd, we're starting to get a formation of a channel here, right? So this is what we call the Boot Island. This is the start of the Boot Island, and on this side of the island is our farthest tributary, or our tributary closest to the main lagoon, and then we have a main channel that's going through here. And you can see, or I hope you could tell how much lower the profile is now. We've taken out, a massive amount of fill already to get down to the historic alluvial and wetland soils. July 3rd. The protesters are gone, but the signs remain. And the signs are kind of mean, right?
Kind of.
Kind of mean, right? Yeah, slightly inaccurate, but they're signs. They were interesting, but there was nobody manning this booth, really, right? Occasionally, we'd see one person there. August 1st, this is the main channel. So now I am looking straight out to the main body of the lagoon. You can see the sandbar peeking out over there. The lagoon's now closed again. So this is the main channel, and you can see this really, like I said, this long U-shaped profile. Instead of being narrow and steep-sided, we have this really long, shallow profile, so that the water, as it gets at different tidal levels, will be able to just flood the landscape. This is about 3-foot elevation right here. This is what we call the mudflat area. This will probably be little to no vegetation in this area when the tide comes in and out. So it basically, and birds love that kind of habitat. And above that, in this area here, from 3 to 9 foot in elevation, this is our low marsh, mid marsh, high marsh habitats, which all have different kinds of vegetation. And the different tidal heights, or when the lagoon closes, will be able to flood different areas of the landscape. And we're actually having our contractor leave divots and nooks and crannies above 4 foot of elevation, so that we get kind of what we call microhabitat, where there's little depressions in the landscape where water can remain or slowly evaporate, so you get more salinity in the soil, and just kind of a more natural feeling landscape, which is different for our contractors because they like to smooth grade it. That's their finished in their head, and so they're working with us though on that. And on July 5th, we start up the dewatering plant. We've kind of reached saturation now. We can't move any more water on site. The lagoon is now seeping in through the bottom. We've reached a level where we're digging down low enough where we're hitting the groundwater level, and we're hitting the old lagoon soils, and water is now coming up into our site. So we now have to start to dewater. And you can see this is our recirculation pipe, so if anything goes wrong, or during our 48-hour testing period, this circulates back into the lagoon, so no water actually gets discharged to the ocean. This is the intake system, and this goes right to our treatment system, right? And basically, it's a very complex treatment system. It has tanks to get rid of the silt and the turbidity. These are sand filters that treat down to a very small particle size. Then we go through bag filters, which treat down to even a smaller particle size. They introduce chlorine to disinfect, and they introduce a coagulant, so it disinfects for bacteria, and then the coagulant helps them pull out all the metals that are in the lagoon water, and then it goes through a series of these tanks. The first 2 rows are activated carbon filters, so it takes out all the chlorine and all the other impurities, and the final step are these resin bead media filters that take out any metals that have coagulated in there. And the end result, before it gets discharged to the beach, is super clean water. It's like, 20 times cleaner than the water we're sucking out of the lagoon.
How does it taste?
Salty, but cleanish. And so then one of the things that we made sure that we had is that the contractor had to prove that this system would work consistently over a 48-hour period and meet pretty high standards and do all these tests in sequence. So essentially, there's this guy testing all over the place, and then we have all these labs coming, and then we have all the resource agencies coming and testing the water. We're testing the water not only coming into our system, but also going, after it goes through the treatment process. And in this case, it's coming back to our lagoon, but they have to show us that it'll work for 48 hours and make every single one of those tests work for 48 hours. So it took them a little while to get the hang of it and set all their machines right, but by the 17th, they were good to go. And then, so now we're removing water from the soils again, and they're digging down. And this is my favorite part. We start to hit the historic wetland soils. There's all this talk about how this didn't used to be a wetland, right? I mean, all the historical data shows that it was a wetland. Of course it was a wetland if you look at it in topography, but all the there was this cry going out that it used to only be baseball fields, and that it was always kind of this weed patch, like Suzanne was saying. And so we dug down, and every time we start to hit about 4 foot in elevation, we see this layer of decomposing vegetation that's been buried for God only knows how long. And then a foot and a half below that, we start to see these silty, sandy soils and these cobbles and gravel of obvious wetland soils. And then a foot below that, it starts to just literally, the water just starts to perk up through this sand and alluvial wetland layer. And you can see how clean the water is coming out. And the difference is incredible between the water coming up through this system and the water that's next door in the other system. And so every time we hit down there, I was just like, oh, that's going to be so nice to walk in. That's going to be so nice to sample, compared to what we were sampling in that black muck, right? So here's a little close-up of the alluvial wetland soils. You see the old cobble, gravel, silt, sands. And then here, this one, it doesn't show up that good, but you can see, I mean, basically the difference between our fill soils and when we hit the alluvial soils. There was kind of a distinct band there that I thought was cool. July 3rd, here goes the final bridge. We had a Phoebe living under this bridge for about 37 days, 37 and change. Not that I was counting, but, and I had two babies in there that were protecting, and they're great moms and dads, and they hung around the nest and brought them food, and the bridge sat there, and we waited for the Phoebe nest to fledge and the chicks to hatch, and then the chicks to not use the nest anymore. And finally, it was determined July 2nd that they were completely done. They're not coming back. We double checked it, and then July 3rd, they ripped out that bridge. They weren't taking any more chances for Phoebes coming back there. But it was pretty cool. So that was our last basically barrier that's crushing our circulation and causing all the sediment as the water comes in to drop out there, and as the water tries to go back out to drop out on either side of the bridge, and is causing literally the lagoon to fill in at about 1 inch per year. This is another thing. So if you don't know the lagoon, this is probably a nerdy thing. This is the flap gate drain. That's been there for the 20 years I've been playing in the lagoon. And it's taking water from the colony, putting it in this, and they have to have this flap gate on it, this gate valve, so they can actually close it, because water during high tide gets up into that pipe and then reverses up the colony's drains and then comes out on Colony Road. So they have to have this flap gate drain. We're building that swale that goes along the colony area. That's going to.
Who controlled that?
Homeowners controlled it, right? But it's been there a long time, and it was always bringing pollution in there. And I mapped it in 1999, along with 3 other points that were pinpointing pollutant into the lagoon from different various areas. The colony being one of them. And we're finally going to build a swale that, like we did in the parking lot, that allows rainwater and pollutants from the colony to soak into the ground, the plants to uptake it, and when we can't suck up any more water, there's a filter at the end of it. So all the water coming from our parking lot or from anywhere coming onto our property, except for the city of Malibu's drain, will all be treated through natural processes. So that's really exciting for me. And then one of the other things that was said is, where's Rich? Submerged aquatic vegetation, Rich. It's never going to come back, and this was an area that was graded 3 weeks ago, down, I don't know, 5 foot from its original elevation. They filled it back in and used it as a storage area while they were working in other places, and it's literally rock solid, full of rupia. You could walk across it. So we have a little, like Suzanne said, a little bit of submerged aquatic vegetation or algae is a good thing. A lot of it means you have too many nutrients and can be a bad thing. And so we got some heat from some folks that said the rupia would never come back. And I was trying to tell them we'd never be able to get rid of it even if we tried. And
Is that native?
this is native, yeah. It's just super dense. And it gets so dense at the lagoon sometimes it can almost choke the flow. So we're hoping that with the new sediment regime and the better flushing, that we'll have lower nutrients coming into the system, and then eventually we'll moderate the amounts of submerged aquatic vegetation and algae that get into our system. So here you can see this, basically the main channel's done, right? And this is kind of a side view, but that's my main channel. You can see how much wider and expansive it is. The old channels were about 25 foot wide. This is 160 foot wide, but it's only a single channel. And I got a tributary coming off that main channel, and this is our main tributary. It actually curves, well, you can't see it, but it curves around this way. And it's quite a sight to behold. August 24th, bam, more trash. These are giant pipes that we found coming underneath the lagoon from the colony. These are like old clay sewagey looking pipes. And big old messed concrete, rusty metal type pipes. And they're still going. We haven't tracked them all the way back, but they keep going and continuing towards the colony. So we're gonna find a place where we can cut them and cap them and make sure there's nothing, no continued pollutants coming through those
How
pipes.
far below the,
6 feet.
wow.
This is the 24th again. This is just a pile of debris that we found. And you can see now my biology guys are, much to their chagrin, are on a different detail. We call it trash detail. They call it hell. I make them basically play Frogger with all our bulldozers, run out and grab each piece of trash as they're potentially spreading it from the fill soil so that we possibly don't bury any more trash while I have it open. And so I'm kind of obsessed with it, but my biological monitors don't seem as happy. And that is a little more finished, and it's showing our pump, so you can actually, that pump is pulling water. Sorry, our pump is, it looks really good on my screen. Our pump is pulling water that way, but here's the boot island, almost complete. This whole channel is now complete, and the tributary that I showed you before comes off this way and around that boot island. We call it a boot island because it looks like a boot on the map. The new path, August 20th, we changed our access. So before, people were accessing around the back of the lagoon, around the access road, the lifeguard access road. And now they're using our berm. It's a beautiful access way, actually. It has views of the ocean as you walk along it. And then we have this green fence here to protect people from dust from the construction site. But it's a very nice temporary access and would be accessible to anyone who wanted to use it. This is the other channel. Actually, this is looking in the opposite way. So this is actually looking back towards the golf course, and the colony is right there. So this is the main channel. I still have a road going through the middle of our site, so it's separated by a 12-foot construction road. But you can see the extension of that long, wide, shallow, flat channel. And then these are just some aerial flyovers that my guys did. We're doing this aerial surveys of boats in the harbor, so I had them fly this. This is from May 27th, a week before we started the project. June 27th, you can see this is where I'm temporarily storing water to go to the treatment plant. The treatment plant is almost built on June 27th. There's the pipe that goes out to the ocean. They've started work in this main channel. They completely have, the other channels, remember there used to be a 1, 2, 3 channels here, are pretty much gone, except for this one, which we're using as storage. And you can see my bird nesting islands that we're protecting in place. Also, on June 19th, we got this little piece of news from U.S. Fish and Wildlife, who said, how do I explain that? who announced on a map that this area here was critical snowy plover habitat. And snowy plovers basically live here on the beach in front of the lagoon by the surf zone, and don't use any of this area here, and certainly don't use any of these bluff areas here. These are about 12 to 15 foot above sea level. But because of the way they drew it on the map, they had to go through a special consultation, all this thing, so I couldn't let my construction guys basically work in this area for, I don't know, from June 19th to probably July 19th, and they were going crazy because this is a place they wanted to put a lot of fill. We have a big observation deck that's going right here that's going to look back up over the watershed, and so they were not so happy about that. There's July 19th. So now they're not working because the treatment plant is still being tested. And, oh no, they just finished finished the treatment plant testing. And, oh, and then the snowy plover habitat was holding them up now. So they went back to work 2 days after this. This is August 22nd. So now, this is about 5-foot elevation. So you can see, basically, this is that main channel. This is the tributary, and again, it's full to 5 feet. They're now using this area that they'd finished grading as water storage area. And they're starting to pump this from here back into here. That is a model of what it looks like at 5.25 feet. And you can see those two channels look very close to what they modeled. So nice job, clerk. August 22nd. Not a protester in sight, not a sign in sight. And no problems. The project's going ahead, it's going well. There's well, when I say no problems, there's problems that come up every day that we deal with on the ground, myself and Suzanne of State Park. But they're mostly logistical things and trying to make sure our contractors stay focused and on target, but all is going well. And oh, there is one sign. This is our sign that we put there. It's a rendering of what the project's going to look like when we're done and who's financed the project. And then that's all I have.